And when I say member states, this applies to Europe, because Laura asked me not just to talk about national politics, but at the end of the day, those representatives of member states are democratically elected, and they go to Brussels to bargain their national interest. And they go back home, and they say, oh, I got this and this from Brussels, yeah? I find this of Nello that this will not go anywhere, because adopting this resolution by the Council would basically mean that they commit collective suicide. They will transform themselves in a local government and transfer more powers to the European Centre, which they will not do. Whether this is a good idea or a bad idea, basically showed how it worked in the early years of integrations in this book entitled European Integration, The Rescue of Nation State. And this is the case, 10 minutes of a discussion to the heads of state. It was not like this at the beginning. At the beginning, there was a paper of Professor, and then Clinton or Blair or Jospin were giving responses. So let's not only put fingers at others, we have to put sometimes look at the mirror too, as the intellectual community. But I want to propose to you something rather controversial. What if democracy itself is the problem? My colleagues in politics departments all over the world identify some problems which you already know. Yeah. I won't go into them because this is the daily bread of our political scientist studies. Yeah. Our students know it very well. But I will go further, which explains the title of the Italian edition of my book, where I argue basically that democracy is short-sighted in terms of time and in terms of space, which are basic political categories. In terms of space, because the democracy is tied to the nation state, defending selfish interests of a given territory and community. My former boss, Lord Dahrendorf, would tell you there's no democracy beyond the state, and even more famous specialists on democracy like Juan Linz or Alfred Stepan saying no state, no democracy too. We can question this, but we cannot agree that this is really predominant way we reason for various reasons. But democracy is also short-sighted in terms of time, because it's by its nature hostage to present-day voters with detrimental implications for the future generations, because those who do not vote, at the end of the day, always lose. Politicians, like during elections in particular, make pictures with babies, you see, go to schools and say that we are going to run our country for our future of our families. But when tough decisions come, they will always postpone difficult cases. Now even extreme right doesn't deny climate change. But they say, no, 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 this is all, this whole Green Deal is the agenda is too tight, to stop buying diesel cars by 35, it's just totally unrealistic. We have to do it, we have to do it slower. And now there is this case of the houses and, transformations of heating of houses. This is all fine, but we have to slow down. Why? Because they have to make tough decisions. The same about debt, Okay, we are all in favor of reducing our debt, yeah? We don't want to punish our children, yeah, or grandchildren, but we cannot just cut on basic services, right? At the time that we have to spend more on defense, it's the story which is not even, interesting. We all know how it works, yeah. So it's not that politicians are against the future generations. They have to make tough choices. And if they don't give, premium to my generations, which is the most disciplined voter, because, I'm still not pensioner, but I'm pensioner age, so to speak, in Britain at least. And they will be out of office. Very simple, right? So not even their fault, let's put it this way. This is the nature of democracy. And this explains why, this is my major thesis, that the democracy falters because the world is ever more interdependent and running at ever faster pace. And this is what I try to show you. So we could get away with this when the world was less interdependent and when things were moving slower. But this is the past. And this is why I recently wrote review. I usually agree to write review only if I like books. But I recently wrote a review of biggest gurus in democracy, like Carloon, Fukuyama, Shane, Taylor, and I titled it Democratic Nostalgia. Because they all want to go back to the original democracy. But the English would have a beautiful sayings like water under the bridge. Because this whole democracy worked for the world which was less interconnected and running under slower pace, which is not compatible to democracy we have now. And the questions, you don't have to study politics to realize what we experience today. You go to this funny movie, Don't Look Up, because it's beautifully show you what happens when democracy rewards hype and spin, and generates very short-term fixes, because you see, elections are not just every 4 years. There are always some elections. Yeah, we just had here in Italy national. We constantly have regional. Look at television. They talk, who won in Sardinia, who won in Abruzzo. It's all parties work according to this schedule. And then there are Europeans. And there's always, we are in permanent electoral fever, so to speak. And what happens when democracy looks back rather than forward, which is a disease of this time, because, of course, when you don't have solutions for the future, you look backwards. And this explains you in this particular country, the whole discussions about the legacy of fascists, but in other countries where there is no legacy of fascists like Poland, they look for other reasons to look back, and we can give a lot of examples. In Britain, the war about monuments, beautiful example, still ongoing, yeah? And of course, what happens if the democracy ignores problems outside our borders and trying to please the narrow or selfish group of voters? So what I believe we are in, and what we have to understand, is that politics, time, and space are today out of sync, which is the major problem, independently who is in the government. And of course, we all want that our people will win next elections, yeah? But I don't know whether this is not scientific, because I haven't seen data on this, but I have increasingly the feeling in various countries that we want to prevent the others governing us. But we have very little trust that if our people will win, things will get better. Certainly seen this with Biden administration in America, which explain why most probably Trump will go back to office. I see it now in Poland, that everybody was so relieved that nativists were removed from the government, but things are not changing the way anticipated, and so on and so on. And I never thought in terms of time and space when I studied democracy, but in a way, the pandemics made me think about this. And I won't say why, because you realize, of course, that time and space for our personal life is much more important than we thought before. And of course, the war just outside Europe's borders did the same. But I believe, and this is what I try to understand most, was the impact of the internet revolution. What has internet revolution done to us, so to speak? And these are all obvious things shown in academic literature first, and now they are common knowledge, right? They made the word flat. You know why. They speeded things up, not just through instantaneous communications, but through, basically continuous work, 24/7. You see, I now work in Venice. During Marco Polo times, they already traded with far away. So to talk that globalization was created in the 1990s of the previous centuries, it's just for the birds. They have not conducted transactions with the whole world in a fraction of a second. That is the difference of the internet revolution. So not only shrunk space, but also time. And we are talking, but there is something else what is more important, because political science like to focus on the institution. And what those who study internet, like Manuel Castells, discovered already 3 decades earlier. In fact, in communication studies, Castells is considered as a passé now. but in political science, he's still to be discovered. But what was the whole key argument of Cassel's when he studied digitalization? Is that digitalization gave premium to informal, horizontal, non-institutional networks at the expense of bureaucratic, heavy institutional states. And of course, you know, digitalization also increased pluralization, hybridity, as we call it, and complexity, which we are scared of, we don't understand very much. So all of this, I'm always surprised how much we are using old narrative to describe new things. Because if you look at the war even in Ukraine, there are a lot of old things like, they are fighting for specific territory. Yeah? So it's a very old way of fighting the war. But have you noticed this is all drone wars, war? And the drones function, they are totally dependent on the digital technologies. And the nature of all this is not even comprehended. The EU, didn't use the traditional sanctions. It targeted digital financial arrangements of Russia, not successfully, if only because we don't understand how financial networks work in the digital era. And, I will come back to this a little bit later. And political science, doesn't really understand those things very well, because what we study in the politics department, electoral preferences, party system. I mean, with all respect for party system, what parties and what systems we have, I mean, Italy is a beautiful case here. You don't know whether we are serious still here, but you cannot become professor. The most important chair in political science is that you study party system, right? The internet revolutions is largely studied by communication people, which are not political scientists. I can tell you, because I had a few years the ERC big project. I ran it with media people. They are from another planet, yeah. And it took me 4 years to learn how they think and how they do research, but political scientists still consider media people like kind of, I'm talking, about anecdotes, but I bet you have all your own experience in this. And even migration is usually not studied by political scientists, although this is the hottest political topic, especially among politicians, because studies time and again show that the public considers migration important, but not the most important, as politicians tend to claim. And had Mr. Renzi read something about the studies, he wouldn't let his, Minister of Interior, Minniti was his name, applauded by Mr. Salvini, run the migration policy the way he did. But these are other matters. Sometimes it brings good results. The Polish government lost elections, the populists now lost elections because they thought that they can run only on migrations, and they were proved wrong. So these are the topics which students of democracy are paying very little attention to. But if you look at history, you see that politics always tried to control time and space. That without this, they couldn't really run the empires. you know, while doing research for this book, I look at a lot of these things mentioned here. And look, how come that all the famous people of this world, like from Caesar to Robespierre, Stalin, and Ataturk, they all adopted the new calendar. Because they understood that they have to control time. They are, you look at the state building process, books, they all show you how the public clock was important in disciplining the society. You can see this in Venice very well, because the public clock was, basically, for instance, telling the Jews in the ghetto when they have to return, and before the gates of ghetto were closed. But then you had all issues in capitalist economy about clock time, work, and something like sounds like a fantasy today, when that European integration, European Commission has to adopt regulations that the boss is not supposed to expect our answer after hours, of office through the mobile, but we are playing this game too. Do you go to bed next to your mobile? And if you cannot sleep, what you do? Do you check your emails? If you don't check your emails, you at least look out at things. You see, we are part of this already, consciously or unconsciously, of all this business of time and space. And and even democracy has regulations on an enormous number of things. And if you ignore this, you don't understand the role in which politics control our time and space. Because politicians always tell us that the time is giving. It has nothing, they have nothing to do with this. But the time is not giving. The whole history of humanity shows you that, as a famous German sociologist, Elias, once said, if there would be no politics, there would be no time. Space, even more so. You can basically describe the whole history of politics in terms of unbounding and rebounding. I don't know where I have slides about this, but you see, the whole history, like people like Saskia Sasse will show you, is about rearranging the relationship between territory, authority, rights, and identity. And there was all this process of rebounding, and then there was a process of unbounding. And this is because in humans could be divided into basic groups, nomads and settlers, not just those who are left and right, yeah. But in fact, I believe myself that today left and right was replaced by the cleavage of sovereignty or sovereignists and liberal international. And take the issue of high-speed regime, on which not political scientists, sociologists more wrote a lot. It's, not just technological accelerations, but acceleration of social change and the pace of life. I mean, in Poland, there is now a big abortion debate, something you had in the past. And you will be surprised how social change took place very quickly in the society dominated by Catholic Church, and which turned very much over a decade, changed the positions on abortions from the idea that this is something to be decided by the church to the idea that this is a matter for the woman and her rights to decide about it. I mean, this is just unbelievable how quickly this change has happened. And of course, there are those who are trying to earn money on this. Down you can see my favorite advertisements of brain training to accelerate speedy learning and thinking. Then you have all change of our work, which I gave you some examples. Here you have a positive story, of workation, of people who can work remotely from beautiful beach. In fact, I sometimes feel like I'm practicing it very much, when I'm on remote teaching from my Tuscan terrace overseeing towers of San Gimignano, but there are, of course, much more dark sides of this too, because as much as we want to, for instance, to have supermarkets open 7 days a week, you know very well that the people who work there have often no rights to say no to the turbo-capitalist economy we are living today, yeah? And this is this beautiful quote from Guardian journalist: "We are all sleeping in the office now." And you know very well what I mean. So you can think you have more freedom because you can have a lecture from your Tuscan terrace, but at the same time, you know very well that you are, your home, your bedroom even, is an office. And this has enormous implications on democracy, because I showed you some slides, some headlines, but this is these are bites about the new world we are living, with enormous implications for the way democracy works. And here you can read some citations I put to you on the slide, but you see, my friend from LSE, Jonathan White, just published a book about WhatsApp governance. And he beautifully shows that since financial crisis, most all democracies in Europe work against all procedures allowing transparency, deliberations, and scrutiny. And you cannot blame them for that. The issue of WhatsApp government came beautifully out during, when European Parliament asked von der Leyen records of her negotiations with Big Pharma about vaccines, COVID vaccines. And von der Leyen said, sorry, but I conducted them on WhatsApp and I deleted. You can say this is against law. But what if she wouldn't do that? If she would stick to the procedures, democratic procedures, it would take at least 2-3 weeks delay. How many people will die during this time? During financial crisis, Merck, it was decided practically overnight that debts of multinational banks, I was at the time a client of Amro Bank, the Dutch bank, who had sites in 156 countries, that the nation state is responsible for debts of these multinational banks. And you know how it ended. Some states were able to shoulder those debts, and others not. I mean, or take the recent case, you know, of a country which makes referenda about even about crossing the street, Switzerland. And think about the merger between UBS and Credit Suisse, which passed billions, billions passed hands. And the decision was made over the weekend between those banks, federal state, banking regulatory authorities. Overnight, billions moved hands, and nobody protested because they knew if they wouldn't do this, it would end up much worse. So what I try to show you is that basically democracy, as we know from the book, doesn't function any longer. But we act as it does because we cannot afford otherwise, because the price of doing differently, you know, would be too high. And here, of course, is my story about Chinese. The point, of course, is that it's not enough to make quick decision. It is important to make right decision. And the right decision sometimes cannot be made if there are no critiques allowed to show possible implications, and if you basically run with closed eyes and without any interest groups being able to warn you what are the implications of what you do. But the problem is there. The problem is there. And I was talking about time, but I can talk about space too. I mean, European Commission didn't have any authority in the field of health during COVID. And as you know, the first thing states did is to close the national borders. Of course, they very quickly learned that national borders are not the most important. You know, when my favorite comedian Luca said, no, we don't want, you know, the president of the Campania region, when he said, you know, no, we don't want these people from Lombardia in Campania. And another famous comedian from Veneto said, no, I'm not going to wait for vaccines from Rome or Brussels. I will call Putin directly and take Sputnik. So what I want to say to you is, but when, of course, there was the need to negotiate vaccines, they realized that if states will do it on their own, they will end up, those who are rich will end up with something, but those who are less wealthy will end up with something expensive and late. So they asked Commission to do this. And then when there was, there was the need to help those societies to get out of the cause of COVID, the COVID recovery plan was the only way for most of them to do this. So even though the Commission didn't have formal, prerogatives in this field, had no other options what to do this. By the way, in the environmental field is the similar issue. Now, take the issue of war. I mean, the Commission doesn't have any prerogatives in the defense field, but most of the money transferred to Ukraine, including, purchases of arms, because Commission pays to member states to send these arms to Ukraine. basically done by the Commission, by the EU. Well, you know, so we do all those things because the world we live in requires quick actions over the borders, but frankly, our system of democracy doesn't allow us to do this because, as we talked before, change of the treaties, forget. So if there is no possible change of the treaties, they do it outside the treaties in an informal way. And this means that, of course, democracy is not working the way we read it in the books. Here you have some example of this, how it works in spatial terms. And again, these are only bites because they squeeze a big discussion in the intellectual circles and political ones, because I even cite here Greta Thunberg, who certainly is not an academic. And you see, let me give me another example, migration. Because all governments and the EU, because there are two versions of sovereignty, national and European. European sovereignty, federalists want to replace national borders by European one, but it's always about the border. Yeah. So they believe this, the roots of migration. The roots of migration, we all know: war, poverty, climate change. So to address the roots of migration, you need concerted efforts, because one country, however rich, is not enough, over the years. And if you don't do this, you can forget that you can stop migrants on the border. Of course, it has some effect. You can 10% maybe of all, but it is not what you want. So if you are so concerned about migration, I'm not. I'm a migrant myself. But if you are so concerned with migration, you have to, and you want to be effective, you have to address the issue of war, poverty, climate change in the countries where migrants come from. What do we do about this? We basically cut development aid. We contribute to some conflicts, either by supporting dictators who we paid a lot of money for keeping migrants away from the shore. Libya is a beautiful example. I remember how Berlusconi was kissing, Gaddafi on a number of occasions, and they were, basically a number of states were paying, not only him, to the Tunisian Ali, they paid a lot of money to these dictators there. Then they bombed those dictators. Then they left them to local warlords, and they were surprised that we've got migrants. What kind of investment in those countries we are doing? Forget. So after Arab Spring, I went to Tunisia. This was the only democracy which survived Arab Spring. And I asked what the EU is doing. And they are only interested in keeping migrants away from the shore. And it is now also dictatorship, because, as you know, the president of Tunisia is not very democratic. So, but this all happens because we have conceptions of time and space which says migration is to be faced on the border, and we have to fix it now. It doesn't work this way. So I can give you a lot of examples showing how politics, time and space are out of sync. how we are looking to the past in order to solve the problems of the future, how we are resistant to change for good reasons sometimes, because change has always winners and losers. I'm speeding up because although I don't have a watch here, I've seen some of you look at your watches, which means that I'm over time. And you know, it is easy to say to castles that we have to empower networks because they are more able to deal with the problems we are in. But as you know, I'm one of those who initially, when I had networks, I was getting nervous. What is network? Is it a viola club? Or is it, a cell of jihadists? But then, of course, I learned that there are networks already, like networks of cities, NGOs, even business associations. And the EU as such, which animal slaughter, basically, rightly, I think, describes as organizations running in the network mode, especially since they cannot run according to the letter of treaties, which are dysfunctional by now, who contribute already to public goods more than the states. And migration is here a good example. The states can run policies on migration, but who is taking the migrant? Who is arranging shelter for them, education, jobs, integration into society? Cities. Nobody asked them what cities think about migration policy. I talked to the Amsterdam City Council. They said our sovereignist government now adopted law, social housing for the Dutch only. We are not going to implement this law. Because if we do this, these people will sleep on the street. If they sleep on the street, we have health problems, security problems, everything. We cannot afford this. So we see already how various networks can and are contributing to public good. But we have to understand how networks were different than states. And this slide is very important because they show you that they are like from different galactic. And if we don't understand this, if political scientists study only states and not networks, we are never able to understand how to adjust our decision-making and legitimizing our decision-making. And I'm not going to read those things because of shortage of space, but I think this is one of the major challenges we are facing. And of course, you know all the problems which we are facing. But you see, I give you another example. When politics, time and space are out of sync. Do you remember a few months ago there was a proposal of owners of the artificial intelligence firms to have 6 months moratorium on technological development, so to give the states ability to regulate artificial intelligence? Do you remember this? For them, it was an enormous offer. 6 months in their business. It's an epochal time. In democracy, 6 months? Even in nation states, parliamentary committees wouldn't meet, let alone adopt law. And what about the global? He said, thank you. You self-regulate yourself. But like with all technologies, they have advantages, but they have disadvantages. And if you don't stimulate the former and halt the latter, you are cooked. And this is where we are now. Because what the European Parliament now is adopting on artificial intelligence is cosmetic. It is not up to the challenge. And I can tell you one thing. I can imagine the world without democracy, but I cannot imagine the world without the internet. So we've got a problem. Because if you think that society will opt for democracy against the internet, forget. And I have no time to explain why. So we have somehow to find a way, if we want to go in a gradual reformist way, to give access to decision and resources to those who actually can contribute to the public goods, and they have a record of doing those things. So in conclusions, I would say we have a greater array of technological and institutional means to command time and space, but we misuse those means and very often cause more damage than good. And this competing egoism generated by inequality within and across border states, they all make it difficult to arrive at a common shared definition of minimal rights. You see, there is a big paradox here. You know, I'm giving you this lecture at the time that the nation state is back in vogue. And I say to you, you have to go more local and more transnational in terms of time, space, and you have to understand the implication of turbo-capitalism if you want to make democracy work. Because what I fear is now emerging is that the bad guys are taking advantage of technology more than the good one. And this is a problem. And since we are good guys here in the university, the very fact that we cannot do it, on the internet, it tells you something, yeah? But what kind of democracy? What kind of democratic reforms we had since the beginning of democratic era? Have you seen how business firms, and I don't consider business firms as bad guys, Have you seen, but the organized crime I consider as bad guys, and they did take advantage of digitalizations much more than democracy. What kind of democracy we had? The only experimentation was Cinque Stelle, and you know how it ended with the digital voting, And it will not work, because if firms are transnational and parliaments are national, the laws will always be inadequate. And, and this was an illusion to believe that kind of ideology will bind us together. And simply, I fear that our problem today is not that we prevent the bad guys running governments, although we are failing to do this, but the problems are much more deep. And the simple solutions to complicated problems will not emerge. I mean, I'm all in favor of simple solutions. I don't believe that minimum wage will get rid of inequalities, nor do I believe that inheritance tax will get rid of inequalities. But you should at least try. And if you don't try, it gives the signal. And so don't be surprised that inequalities are rising, But each time, the journalists ask me, okay, this is all very interesting, but give me 2 or 3 concrete specific solutions how you will solve it, I tell him, why don't you go to a library and buy it, particularly at the airports, they sell those books, how to lose 20 kilos in 2 weeks. They give you easy solutions for complicated problems. Because the things I try to tell you is that we, in academia, in political science, don't understand, because we never studied time and space properly. We studied party system, we studied electoral systems, we studied all these things which basically are helpful, but not sufficient to understand what was going on. And basically, I try to tell you that changing leaders or embracing new ideologies will not sort out those problems. And we tried solutions to address this, which were totally inadequate. And we have to understand why. Because you cannot fix them by decree, the problems I'm trying to tell you. You cannot sort them out because you create a body responsible for time or space, for the future generation. It doesn't work. So we have to move from the system governed by states to a system governed by networks. But how to make those networks accountable, transparent, and institutional to resemble something what we call democracy is a big challenge. And by dismissing this option, we are basically postponing the time of decision. But we don't know how to do this. I don't think it is impossible. When I worked for Solidarność, after martial law in Poland, I was going to the United Nations and Helsinki process chiefly, but I also was going to the International Labour Organization. When I realized that all decisions in ILO are being made by 3 actors: states, trade unions, and business associations. And somehow it was possible. Why we cannot do it in the European setting? Why there is discussions of having second chamber of European Parliament, composed of national parliamentarians? And why not trade unions and business associations? Why not cities? Why not NGOs? You see what I mean? So I think we are going into wrong directions trying to change democracy. But I have no time to lament anymore. And I don't know whether we still have some time for questions, but if we do have, I'd be more than happy, and please don't hesitate to ask them in Italian. Although for the record, I think I have to answer in English.
So. Thank you so much for your inspiring speech, and I'm really moved because there is a lot of sociology in your speech from a political scientist, as you know. So, se volete potete fare domande anche in italiano o in inglese, come volete. Se c'è qualcuno che vuole rompere il ghiaccio, ci sono molte cose. Una mano alzata. Sì?
Se non sbaglio aveva citato un libro che parlava di WhatsApp, se può ripetere il titolo.
Non mi ricordo, ma di titolo non mi ricordo. Sono già vecchio, dai. Ma ricordo autore Jonathan White, bianco, Jonathan White. Credo che è pubblicato The Profile Book, è uscito appena. Ma è uscito l'altro libro su questo tema, ma non mi chiedere nemmeno titolo, perché people start to think about this in political science too. So I wanted to say that it's not like this, that this is, there was even published recently a handbook on politics and time by Oxford University Press, which I recommend you highly to read. Very good collections of articles. So people start to appreciate it. And in sociology, Bauman was one of those who talked on spatial problems for some time. And of course, there are also some good things in globalization studies, but I think this is not about globalization studies, which was, to some extent one-sided, and I've seen it in the third way discussions. I remember Clinton was one of these techno-optimists. He once came to our meeting and he said, "Guys, I just talked to specialists and I know how to solve problems of Africa poverty." We said, "Oh, interesting. So how?" "We should give them all mobile phones." No, they were, at the time they were not, but they were mobile phones already. And then, they could call from Africa or Latin America, the stock market in New York, to see what the real prices of their products, and they will not allow them to be exploited. I thought, if this would be so easy to solve the problem of inequality. But there was some kind of trust in technological solutions to complicated social problems, but there was also appreciation that you have to change the way to think, at least about space and public authority, differently than it was at the time. But there was not much appreciation of the issue of time in politics, which I think digital revolution made it much more pronounced, and we still don't understand how to deal with it.
Un intervento molto provocatorio, che però molto stimolante. Ma in che misura e fino a che punto possiamo effettivamente fare affidamento ai networks? Perché nei networks ci sono altrettanti problemi negativi. Sto pensando ai silos che si creano tra persone che hanno tutte lo stesso modo di vedere e a quello che succede con l'utilizzazione impropria dei social media, per cui si creano delle bolle, dei silos che diffondono poi tutta una serie di fake news che diventano veramente drammatiche. Quindi il problema mio è come fare a distinguere. Io ho ben presente il fatto che i network possono funzionare, i network tra città europee per esempio. Ho ben presente che ci sono aspetti positivi, ma possono esserci anche aspetti negativi per quello che riguarda l'uso delle tecnologie. D'altra parte, nello stesso momento posso anche dire che i telefonini cui lei faceva riferimento un attimo fa, arrivo adesso dall'Africa, se non ci fossero i telefonini sarebbe un problema. Tutto si fa attraverso i telefoni in Africa, si paga qualsiasi cosa, cioè i telefoni sono indispensabili. Quello che sto cercando di dire però non è che tutto il male, cioè mi è chiarissimo il fatto che lo spazio e il tempo sono cambiati e l'idea dei confini è assolutamente da superare, perché tantissime cose oramai si realizzano superando completamente i confini, ma al tempo stesso ho dei problemi anche sull'utilizzo dei network e su quello che i network possono produrre, e in particolare sono molto preoccupata dall'utilizzo improprio non improprio, ma l'utilizzo criminale spesso e strategico delle tecnologie per far passare una serie di posizioni informazioni, penso a quello che la Russia ha fatto in questi ultimi anni come disinformazione. Quindi il mio problema è come facciamo a trovare l'equilibrio tra uno Stato che sicuramente non è più in grado di gestire le cose, tra una democrazia che all'interno di confini nazionali non riesce certo a risolvere i problemi, ma neanche fare troppo affidamento solo ai networks ci può aiutare, perché dentro i network si riproducono delle dinamiche che da una parte possono essere dinamiche positive, dall'altra negative. Le chiedo anche sull'ultima slide, sull'International Labour Organization, se può dire qualcosa di più dal punto di vista e su Barcellona. Conosco tutte e due le realtà, ho fatto anche da consulente per l'International Labour Organization, ero curiosa di sentire davvero in che modo questo può essere. Io ero, diciamo, un po' più scettica su come funziona l'International Labour Organization, anche sulle proposte che avevo fatto totalmente ignorate. Quindi ero curiosa anche proprio dell'ultimo accenno su queste due cose. Mi scuso per la lunghezza.
Grazie. Grazie.
Okay.
Okay.
I basically warn against, I want to warn you against thinking in terms of all and nothing. Because it is easy to say, okay, this is all complicated and there are negative sides, so we do nothing. And it is easy to say, actually, let's leave it as it is because it's better than jumping into unknown. Look, take, for instance, networks. That, you know, that you can say networks, what are networks? There are bad networks, there are good networks, you know. It's all kind of, let's better not go this route. But think about states, you know, which we accept, you know, as a given. You know, they are democratic states, but they are autocratic states. There are states which are able to contribute to public goods, hopefully, but they are failed states too. Even in Europe, what kind of sovereignty has Cyprus? And who really makes decisions in Cyprus? Is it the European Commission, the Russian financial, you know, network? You see, and what I want to say is that, you see, states are democratic. Well, how democratic are some of those states? We've seen in America under Trump. And even in democracies, we believe that they are so democratic, and networks are, it is argued, are not democratic, although, you know, you can argue that cities are closer to the citizen than states. But, you know, you can say networks are not democratic, NGOs are not democratic, they self-select themselves, you know. But okay, how democratic are our states if you can change a government, but you cannot change policies? You know, how many days it took the markets to get rid of Liz Truss, Prime Minister of Great Britain, elected in a democratic way after the country voted for Brexit, which was supposed to take sovereignty back to the Westminster. How many days it took the markets to get rid of her? A week? A weekend? Tell me any other democratically elected politicians who could challenge the markets today. So they can change the family policy. These democratic governments can rewrite history and say, those are now heroes and the others are villains in our history. They can change the name of the street, they can, but can they change, if they really challenge the markets? If they cannot challenge the markets, what we are talking about? So let's not, but doesn't mean that those states are worthless, undemocratic. I never said we should get rid of states. Never said. I only said, let's try to abolish the monopoly of states of making all decisions. And let's try to think about democracy a little bit according to different standards, because if we think that we can legitimize decisions only through the normal parliamentary process and of elections, we may discover that this is inadequate to deal with all the polycrises we are now in. And I try to give you an example how the formal democracy didn't work, because we had to sort out the problems. So what I want to say is, let's not think in terms of all and nothing. This is good, this is bad. And let's start conversations. Let's start also to experiment. First of all, you're a social scientist, you understand, it's all about paradigm. It is not about this and this solution. It's about paradigm, how we make decisions and legitimize them, because decisions cannot be only effective, on technocratic terms. They have to be legitimized, because all technocratic decisions have distributional, effects. They produce winners and losers. So democratic decisions are not, good decisions are not just based only on scientific knowledge. They have to be based also on, they have to be owned by those they concern, so to speak. So this is what I tried to say. I don't have a ready, look, I like you, I don't consider the International Labour Organization the most effective, global organizations, nor do I believe that City of Barcelona got everything right. And, but let's have a courage to experiment, because the alternative is that we just behave like in the Soviet joke, And here I finish my long answer to the short question. Otherwise we behave like in the Soviet joke that there is Stalin, Khrushchev, and Brezhnev, although I don't know whether our students understand this joke because for them it's ancient history. But the older generations will understand. There is a Stalin, Khrushchev, and Brezhnev in the train, and somewhere in Siberia, and the train stops going. And Stalin says, let's shoot the conductor, let's shoot him, because we cannot have with the staff, we will never. So they shoot conductor, but the train doesn't move. So Khrushchev says, let's rehabilitate post-mortem the train conductor, and maybe it will improve situations. So they rehabilitate post-mortem, they shoot conductor, the train doesn't move anymore. Anyway, so Brezhnev said, oh, comrades, why don't we close the curtains and act like the train is moving forward? And this is where we are. We try to ignore those things because we don't have solutions for them. And maybe the solutions represent more danger than opportunity, like artificial intelligence. So we act like we can do nothing. And I understand that embracing change means, change is about power. And you know what is the weak spot of my argument? Is that I believe power is taken. Power is never given. Women didn't get rights because some men, in government decided, oh, let's give those women some rights. No, they were fighting for this. Without feminists, you wouldn't have women's rights. The same about workers' rights. Workers' rights were not given by entrepreneurs because they said, oh, let's divide our income more equally and justly. No, they were fighting for this. So here is, of course, the problem of the agency and who is going to take power. And, for instance, how, and we see that the young generations is turning back to politics rather than engagement. And if they have engaged in something, they will later cut off in a number of situations. I've seen, so what I want to say is that I don't want to be in a situation in which we just say, because things are complicated and they are so dangerous to change anything, let's do nothing. Because this means that it will burst out one day. May not burst out during my lifetime. But do you want to take a chance? Good luck. Eh?
Grazie, thank you, grazie. C'è un'altra domanda, uno studente qui, e poi ce n'è anche un'altra e un'altra. Credo che non possiamo prendere tantissime domande ancora, brevi e poi...
Maybe we combine questions, so
forse sì.
you speak more than me then.
Okay. First one, I just want to make a question that we were talking about in the first point. The topic was the first question was why cannot states live up their normative credo? But I just want to know what are possible solutions to improve the state's capacity to comply with their normative credo. I just want to know what is this. Thanks.
Maybe you combine.
Brevissima, grazie, e poi concludiamo.
How do we, there are a lot of problems, and the end of the monopoly of state, how do we defend against other problems like misinformations, possible demagogues, and how do we distinguish good networks and bad networks that are trying to end democracy or build a society that is not fair in any way?
Allora, prego, penso che puoi rispondere alle due domande,
Okay.
forse
Very
combinandole.
briefly. Very briefly. Look, the first question. Of course, I prefer that we have educated leaders who listen and rather those who are uneducated and arrogant. Of course, I believe that we should have civil service rebuilt in states and not totally politicized as it is now and ignored. You see, I recently had dinner with 5 directors general in Brussels, and they all told me, I thought this is certainly a well-paid job, but these are top civil servants in Brussels. You know what they told me? Nobody listened to us. Nobody listened to us. Even commissioners, they have their political advisors and don't listen to bureaucracy any longer. So, of course, I believe that the traditional ways of strengthening public capacity are important. But what I try to tell is that this is not enough. That those traditional way, to elect a leader who is not stupid and arrogant is not enough. That the strengthening kind of know-how of public bodies is certainly better than having those people totally ignored, but it's not enough. But then the second questions follow to the first question is followed by the second, and you say, okay, there are so many other problems, where to start? Well, there are two ways of doing those things. I'm not a political activist. I'm an academic, and I try to put the finger at intellectual challenge, trying to say that that our current agenda is increasingly out of sync with what is going on. This is what I try to say. And our whole system is giving us good careers and point, you know, but it doesn't mean that we are being relevant for the public use, so to speak. This is what I try to say. I'm not a political activist. I don't know how to organize, you know, a public for change. In fact, I believe that the way my generations organize for change, you know, we organize strike, marches, and so is increasingly irrelevant in the internet age when the whole social protest is being changed. In fact, my colleagues from Oxford published a very good book analyzing how during internet era the social protest has evolved. So I actually, in my limited personal experience as a democracy fighter, I believe that means we have applied are irrelevant or not irrelevant, but are not as effective as they used to be, because exactly society has changed, capitalism has changed, and so, you know, the workers' power is being reduced, and I'm still trade union, you know, a believer, but I believe, for instance, also that these are, we have to adjust the social protest too, not only universities have to change. But as an intellectual, I tell you one thing. If we are able to put our fingers on the right problems, we always find a solution. But if we simply do not do it for whatever reason, then we are going into the circle. And I have to tell you, when I watched television, at least, evening, you know, if you watch Lesette Gruber, I now happily, there is some football sometimes, or Quattro Ristorante or something, so I don't have to watch it, because I get increasingly frustrated that this discussions which is being conducted there is utterly irrelevant to the problems we are facing. And I'm probably not the only one. And you look at students, you probably gave up on those discussions a long time ago. And which maybe explains why you're more on social networks, which are not necessarily the better, not necessarily better than the one I just criticized. So we've got a problem. But we are humans. We have universities. We learn how to deal with these things, and hope we will do it too. Hopefully, the price will not be too high to pay. I mean, in other words, that we don't have to go for another catastrophe to realize how to do these things better. This is my hope.
Grazie, direi che possiamo concludere. Grazie per averci dedicato anche più tempo del dovuto. Grazie per essere stato con noi. E ho anche una buona notizia, perché dopo i primi momenti i nostri tecnici sono riusciti a mandare comunque in streaming, anche se io ho dovuto rispedire tutti i link a tutte le persone che me lo chiedevano, e hanno quindi potuto seguire la lezione molte persone in streaming. Verrà poi registrata e messa sul canale YouTube con tutte le cautele. Quindi grazie ancora a tutti per essere rimasti con noi, e grazie a Jan Zielonka per averci fatto visita, e speriamo di poterlo di nuovo ospitare, insomma, qui in questa sede. Grazie.
Vi raccomando, guardate questo libro che ho scritto, perché io scrivo meglio che parlo.
Sì, comunque lo raccomando anch'io, ma insomma i nostri studenti penso che già abbiano avuto esperienza di della lettura, almeno di alcune parti del tuo libro, che è molto...
E questa volta l'edizione italiana è tradotta bene, dunque...
Sì, è tradotta bene, scorre molto bene, poi tra l'altro è un libro appunto che si colloca, se mi permetti, tra l'accademico e il anche public engagement, se vogliamo, come linguaggio, no? Perché ci sono molti esempi che sono appunto quelli che anche ci hai riportato oggi, che prendono spunto dalla vita reale, dall'esperienza anche, no? di relazioni con istituzioni, con persone che ricoprono dei ruoli. Quindi, insomma, sì, un invito a leggere questo bel libro, anche se nella versione italiana non abbiamo i fumetti, che invece sono molto carini. Allora, grazie ancora. Colleghe e colleghi,